While we were watching this, we did a survey of the crowd, and can they take up that offer of yours to watch it for the next 12 hours? And the Reagan Foundation is going to provide popcorn for everyone. So, well, now we're going to have the opportunity to talk to Ken and his team about how they made this amazing documentary. And let me introduce the other two members who are going to be joining us. First is Sarah Botstein. She's produced some of the most popular and acclaimed documentaries on PBS, is director of the American Revolution. Her previous work includes jazz, the war, prohibition, the Vietnam War, College Behind Bars, and Hemingway. And Christopher Brown is the historian and advisor for the American Revolution. His scholarship has received awards in multiple fields of study: American history, British history, Atlantic history, the history of slavery, abolition, and resistance. Please join me in welcoming Ken, Sarah Botstein, and Christopher Brown to the stage. All right. Thanks, Ken. Thank you, Sarah. Chris, thank you. We're delighted to have the chance to talk with all three of you, and I thought maybe a couple of questions for Ken, and then we'll ask some others for the rest of you. But Ken, one thing I wanted to ask you, knowing that you have been a student of history since you were a young boy and you used to read the encyclopedias, you know a lot of history. What did you learn, and what were your learnings in making this specific film?
I think all of us who were involved in it, and as I said, it's been a 10-year effort, and I want to apologize for the main screen. Most of our live cinematography is done in very impressionistic night things of the soldiers, so you might have to wait until November to see what you actually just heard. But I understand the monitors were a little bit better. I think, Fred, the whole thing was a sense that we accept the violence of our Civil War and the 20th century wars, but because this is without photographs, without newsreels, they're dressed in tights and breeches and have powdered wigs, that somehow we've lost touch with it, and our American Revolution, which I think is the most important event since the birth of Christ, is sort of smothered with the barnacles, encrusted with the barnacles of sentimentality and nostalgia, and that it was important to find a way to do this. So over the 10 years, following reenactors of every stripe, looking for the paintings, looking for the drawings, consulting with the scholars, getting maps, listening to the scholars, coming back, asking them not just to sort of review an idea or a proposal or a script, but to come again and again, as Chris and many of his colleagues have, to be there and make sure we get it right. People who have expertise on Native peoples, who, as you saw, a German historian, we have a French historian, there's a British historian that you just met, and a wide variety, almost 20 American historians who have focused on different expertise to help us get it, that we could put our arms around it. To remove, I think the biggest thing was the sense of inaccessibility of all those boldface names, particularly Washington. We wanted to make him human so that you could appreciate just how central his contribution is, and I hope one of the clips that we showed there really, we're speaking Spanish or French or British English if he's not around. It's that simple how spectacular his role is, and many of the others, but also introduce you to dozens of other characters, women, Native Americans, children, soldiers, loyalists. We didn't, we're umpires calling balls and strikes, so we are not saying, oh, these are the bad guys. In fact, one of the most poignant moments is the film, a loyalist that we follow through most of the episodes named John Peters is at the Battle of Bennington. He's going to lose this battle, and he hears this voice say, "Peters, you damn Tory," as someone sticks a bayonet in him and it's deflected by the rib cage. He recognizes it as his boyhood best friend, Jeremiah Post, who then, Peters says, "I was obliged to destroy." Now, I think that we're fearful that if we get into the real nitty-gritty of the revolution, it will diminish the big ideas. In fact, the big ideas are are made even better and more inspirational by understanding exactly what went on, how difficult it was, how bad the odds are, and that our founders in their extraordinary genius helped us to understand that we were creating something new in the world, citizens, as opposed to subjects, and that citizens would require an effort. Subjects are just under authoritarian rule. Citizens have to invest in lifelong learning, that's the pursuit of happiness, to be more virtuous. If there's a word that shows up throughout our film, it's virtue. Virtue, virtue all the time. They're borrowing from antiquity and they're trying to instill in this new citizenry the idea of our obligations, that this was the highest office. It's an amazing story, and it's taken us 10 years and the help of scholars like Chris to help wrestle it to the ground.
Well, as we sit here in the Reagan Library, and as you corrected your daughter, he did not fight in the Civil War, nor did he fight in the Revolutionary War. No. But he talked about it a lot, and he described the American Revolution as a turning point in human history, much as you mentioned, since the birth of Christ. His words were a triumph of individual rights over the power of a monarch. In your documentary, how do you explore the revolution as not just political upheaval, but this moral and philosophical shift that redefined the role of an individual?
It's exactly that. You hear it in our first quote from Tom Paine, who's sort of the working man's founder, where he says that in order to, get off tyranny, you just have to will it. You have to will it. Or Akana Satega from the Six Nations, he says, whatever you do, never fall out with one another. So it's about unity. I mean, Franklin looks at it and goes, whoa, this has been a functioning democracy of a sort for centuries, and why can't we do the same thing? And of course, at that point, 20 years before a revolution, nobody wants it. But throughout, it's understanding. And Chris has a wonderful comment that's not in the clips we just showed. Let's show the 12 hours. The sun is going down. You'll be able to see it. We'll start over from the beginning. But he's saying that, what begins as this argument, British people arguing about over their rights, suddenly gets broken out into natural rights and universal rights. And so all of a sudden, this quarrel turns into a global war, but it also becomes, as we say in the introduction, somehow about the noblest aspirations of humankind. And it was really important for us throughout, we were looking in the tour, the football, the case that's carrying, that we were never going to be far from that it was never going to be far from our mind, no matter whether we're in the battles, and you'll learn 40 of them, and the personal lives of all these people, dozens of them, that we were never going to let go of that.
Maybe a question for Sarah, just on the making of the film. How do you go about making a visual production when there are no photos, no videos, and we're used to seeing that, but all these scenes with the cannonballs exploding and the houses, tell us a little bit about how you make that into a production.
Well, first of all, I just want to say it's totally overwhelming to be here, and I just want to thank everyone at the Reagan Library, and we got, as Ken was saying earlier, an incredible tour, and I was thinking about what we might say tonight and about Reagan's relationship to the bicentennial, to the last time our country came together to think about our birth, and at the center of his presidency, and I think some of the message of this whole institution are three things: leadership, patriotism, and where America sits in the world and foreign policy. And all of that really starts in 1776. So I really want to hear, I'm excited about that conversation, but I think we've been saying a lot on the road that when we decided to make the film, it was really daunting and really scary to try to tackle a documentary film without the normal documentary evidence that we're so used to working with, and instead it turned out to be a great creative challenge and a creative opportunity, and we spent an enormous amount of the last 8 years in every season shooting really crazy stuff all through the 13 former colonies, and we did that trying to find places that are a celebration of our beautiful landscape and where battles were fought and the history took place, and bring our viewers to those sacred and profoundly beautiful, unusual places that we get to call America now. And then we, as Ken was just saying, we found the reenactors who take this work so seriously, and we got to know them with the cameras off as well as with the cameras on. And, they read the right books and wear the right shoes, and they don't mess around.
Right.
And at first they were a little suspicious of us, and then they got to know us and our cinematographers, and we had drones flying in national parks and through the woods, as you saw, and then really intimate. Our cinematographer would dress up like they did, and sometimes I think he didn't even want to take his clothes off. He loved it. I was like, buddy, you don't have to wear that anymore. No, it's okay. I'll go another round. We just tried to bring the visual language of the time to life, and then also find the documents and the etchings and the stuff that was made at the time and the paintings that have been painted for 250 years as we try to imagine what our history and those battles and those moments felt like and looked like.
And you tried to go to the sites or as adjacent as you
Very
could. How
much.
was that when you say, we'd like to come to the site, we'd like to fire a few cannons? What type of response did you get with?
No, it took a lot of lawyers worrying about a lot of insurance, I'll tell you that. It's a lot of pyrotechnics, but very carefully. That's all very carefully done so that nobody gets hurt and people can imagine what it might feel like and sound like. Just being near a bayonet is scary enough. I can't imagine having to actually be in a place where those are the weapons of war. It's really, 18th century war is very brutal and very devastating.
Yes. Ken, were you about to say something?
Well, I was just saying, I love maps. As a boy, I had a map of the continental United States, and I had the political outlines of the states, but it had all the native tribes. And I remember that I've always loved them. My dad built the map cabinet once because he loved them too. So
He really
we have
loves
more
maps.
maps in this film than all our other films combined, and we love maps. And some of them, we would just take an old, beautiful map. Some of them are aspirational. You'll see the colonies, but Virginia thinks it goes on all the way to the Pacific.
California.
Yeah, right.
North Carolina thinks it goes on all the way west. South Carolina all the way. I mean, it's just amazing, and it's telling you, these are 13 colonies clinging to the eastern seaboard, and what do they call their meeting? The Continental Congress. What do they call their army? The Continental Army. They know where they're going, right? They know where they're headed. And so maps become really important. Sometimes we just show the map. Sometimes, as you saw in the Germantown, we take a beautiful map and just add our arrows, right? And the red for the British and the blue for the Americans, and you have the Chew House lit up, and you can animate that or add the paintings and the drawings, and our reenactors not necessarily doing that battle. They're just, we're filming them over years and years and years, Fred, and collecting an archive the way the National Archives, of which you guys are a part of, in part, would have, and you'd go and say, what do you have of D-Day? And we'd take it. So we go, what do we have of muskets firing or people charging with bayonets for Germantown? And you begin to put them together. And some of the maps that we have are taking those old maps and then making three-dimensional. And then, as you saw, if you could see, we have CGI maps of Yorktown, in which you feel like you're there. You know exactly what's happening and what the topography is. All of those are ways in which we dealt with, as Sarah said, what seemed to be at the beginning for us a daunting challenge, and then became more and more exhilarating as we figured out a language, a kind of hybrid visual language to communicate this story. And I also say, and we don't give enough credit to Jeff Ward, the writer, who I've worked with for 40 plus years, and who wrote this extraordinary script, and to our other co-director, who's not with us, David Schmidt, who is also grew up in Williamsburg, Virginia, playing the fife in colonial Williamsburg, and also found a lot of the voices, the first-person voices that make this a bottom-up story of people that we could all relate to, not just the marble men, as Jane Kaminsky says in our film, that are our founders.
I do think that that's one of the real opportunities here, is just the beauty of the language of the 18th century. So if you don't have the films, you don't have the photographs, but you do have these just extraordinary letters and diaries, and also the text that we know so well. Each time I watch and listen to it, I sometimes just close my eyes, just for the language, the poetry of the period. And then obviously Jeff's script is amazing. There are amazing voice actors that are a part of it. So there really actually is a capacity to transport back to the 18th century, even without all of the tools that we're used to having.
You know, the voice actor thing is a good point that Chris has made, and I had wanted to make it earlier. We may have, ladies and gentlemen, the greatest cast that has ever been assembled for any movie or any television series. And I will try to name a few. Sarah will pick up when I falter, and we will not get through a quarter of the names. People that you've never heard of, like Tom Hanks and Meryl Streep and Paul Giamatti and Laura Linney and Claire Danes and Damian Lewis and Sir Kenneth Branagh and Ethan Hawke and his daughter Maya Hawke and
Josh Hutcherson, Alden Ehrenreich, Samuel L. Jackson, Morgan Freeman, Claire Danes, you say Claire
Liev
Danes,
Schreiber,
Liev Schreiber,
Michael Keaton.
Josh Brolin.
Josh Brolin is George Washington. Jeff Daniels is Thomas
Jefferson. Edward Norton is Benjamin Rush.
Yeah, it just goes on
really
and on. And we're forgetting, maybe we have a third of them.
Yeah.
Wow. Chris, maybe just as I could ask you as an accomplished historian, if you look back at this period in time that the revolution's taken place, are there values then that we had that we don't have now? And are there values we have now that we don't have then?
It's such a wonderful question, and something I've actually been thinking a lot about over the last few days. We were asked a couple of days ago about the optimism of the era. This is an extraordinary leap. The decision to first resist and then fight the British government, and to fight a war when you have not had an army, to form a union of 13 colonies that had never worked together before, to figure out how to finance it and to support it over 7 or 8 years. I mean, it's an extraordinary undertaking, and I think because we know how it turned out, it's easy to miss just what a really special, the degree of difficulty in this task is actually really kind of remarkable. And they couldn't have done it without the sense of, we can do this, a really powerful kind of optimism. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I do think that that is one thing that obviously, you know, the president, this building, you know, I think really represents is a kind of the optimism that the President Reagan had when we talked about America's future. And I do think that that is something, regardless of where you are on the political spectrum, and I do think there's sometimes a little bit more pessimism today about where America is going and where it is. And I do think there's something to be said to going back to this period and recognizing it as an optimistic age, where the sense that the best of America was to come, rather than the best of America was behind us.
Great point. Ken, when we were talking about this film a while back, yes.
What he said.
It was not cynical. It was not cynical.
No. When we talked about this before, one thing you told me that was important to get across and that you learned was just the sheer violence of this, because it wasn't a war that was covered on television. So we just maybe assumed it wasn't as violent as it actually was. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think not having the photographs or the newsreels that are going to prove it, and having paintings and drawings of varying qualities from varying eras doesn't quite do it. And so we worked really hard in the way we shot those paintings, the way we edited them. We have a sound effects track as complicated as any feature film, but you have to understand that this is, as I said, a civil war. Now, in a civil war, there's huge numbers of civilian deaths. There's not that in our Civil War. except in Missouri and eastern Kansas. It's relative. The greatest battle ever fought in North America is the Battle of Gettysburg, the greatest one. There are 2 civilian deaths. There are about 180, 190,000 soldiers in this town fighting it out, and there are 2 civilian deaths. Less than 20 in the siege that goes on for weeks of Atlanta. So what you have in the American Revolution is something really different, where a John Peters can kill his best friend, where Benjamin Franklin's own son, William, the royal governor of New Jersey, is deposed, goes to Connecticut and is imprisoned, finally assumed when he's released that he will go out and go back to London, where he had enjoyed so much of the British aristocracy. And instead, he forms a terrorist organization to kill patriots. Just as there were patriot organizations that were out killing loyalists. You did not want to be in New Jersey or South Carolina during this war. More British and Hessian troops were killed by guerrilla sabotage and action than fell in the major battles of the war, which would be Trenton and Princeton and Monmouth Courthouse. It's bad, and in South Carolina, all the bets are off. I mean, it's funny, it's almost like Vietnam, which had been the previous war film that we'd done, where we talk about pacifying a province, and then all of a sudden we go, scratch that, it's not pacified. The British are going, New Jersey is pacified, and then 3 months later they have to report, it's not pacified. South Carolina, we've pacified it. We've got now these arrays of forts. Oops, 6 months later, it's not pacified. And that's in fact why Cornwallis, who is not supposed to leave South Carolina until it's pacified, moves up into North Carolina and into Virginia, which is going to seal his fate, is because he just doesn't want any more of South Carolina. It is just so rough and tumble, and it's really bad. There are 3 million people living in the colonies, besides our native peoples that are surrounding us, various tribes, and we treat them not as them, but as independent nations with as much sort of prominence and force as say Virginia is, or maybe the Netherlands are. This is a global war, and so these various tribes have been trading as their own entities for hundreds of years since Europeans came to this area, and so they have great importance. But the 3 million Americans, including 500,000 enslaved or free black people, are spread out, and their suffering is proportional to our Civil War, which we just think, the deaths in our Civil War are greater than the total of all the other wars combined. We don't really know what the answer is, as you heard in the introduction, for the revolution. We just say killing tens of thousands of them. We just don't know. And because it coincided, as I was mentioning, with epidemics, there's many, many more deaths. But if you can understand it, that our bloodiest war, this equals it, and it's in an intensely smaller population, and it's among your neighbors. It is really the brother against brother. That happened in the Civil War, but it really happened here. Neighbor against neighbor, father against son in the case of the Franklin family. Lucy Knox, who is the new wife of Henry Knox, loses in the Revolution because of distance and separation and opposition of views. Her father, her mother, her brother, and her sisters. She's alone with her new husband and then a new baby. And it is so heartbreaking to hear her realize and to articulate and hear her voice in the way that Chris is saying, the language of the times. This is incredibly literate populace, and they write and understand what's going on, and so you feel the force and pain of this war. And that was our job, to try to bring that back on.
And maybe a question for Sarah on this. There were so many battles, as you've been talking about, and many that were very consequential. How do you balance covering the battles in here, but at the same time, the big ideas?
That's at the heart of the whole movie.
Okay.
Well, so we talk a lot about this. The American Revolution is the American Revolution, which is a big revolution of ideas and way of being, and turned the world upside down and it's the American Revolutionary War, as Chris so carefully says in the film, which is a brutal, bloody war. And I think Ken often talks about this filmmaking, and the way that he works is all about calibration. So you need to have enough of the war of ideas to keep the stakes for the war that's happening, and how they interact with each other, and how the film is calibrated so that you're constantly reminded. It's a it's a braid of the guys in Philadelphia trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, the people on the ground fighting, the generals in between them. And then, 18th century, there wasn't instant communication or the Weather Channel. So time is very, very different in the American Revolution. It takes 8 years for the war to kind of start, really happen, and end. And a lot of that time is waiting and not knowing what the enemy is going to do, not knowing what your general is going to do, not knowing. So in the parts that aren't the big battles and everyone's waiting, the guys in Philadelphia are trying to figure out what to do and who's going to help them. And it takes, 3 months to get to England or to France or to Spain, and then they're going to think about what they want to do and send it back, and it's another 3 months.
So we live in a binary world, right? Everything's red state or blue state, young or old, rich or poor, whatever it might be. And we get hooked on that. We are in a computer world, which is just a 1 and a 0. And I think we forget about the complications of story as what we all experience in our daily life. And the novelist Richard Powers said the best arguments in the world won't change a single person's point of view. The only thing that can do that is a good story. Now, we're not set out to change people's points of view. We just want to remind them that human existence is the tolerating of contradictions. That you can have, in our jazz series, Wynton Marsalis said, sometimes a thing and the opposite of a thing are true at the same time. We know this in our lives. We know this in the people we love. We can't be married, we can't have children, we can't have friends unless we're doing that. But in our political world, we've devolved to just an on-off switch, which doesn't exist. Those binaries do not exist in nature and do not exist except abstractly. And so what happens is our obligation means that we have to find a way to remove the knee-jerk disposition to make it binary and to make it complicated. You've just killed your best friend growing up. What does that mean? I hope that if people take out of it that we will have done one thing, which is put the us back in the US, but that also you're asking questions of yourself. Which side would I have been on? To be a loyalist is to be what we would call today a conservative. Somebody who said the British constitutional monarchy, this is the best form of government here today. It's true, it was. And you're going to throw it all away, the prosperity that I enjoy, the good health, the good fortune, all of that, for this idea that has a snowball's chance in hell of succeeding, right?
Right.
That's a loyalist. So why would we make them, a negative force? And why couldn't we give them their due? Why couldn't we understand what it was like to be a British soldier, an Irish soldier, a German soldier, the wife of a German officer, the King of England? We always joke about Mad King George. He's really an interesting, unbelievably interesting figure who deserves to live. What about his ministers? What about the generals? Do they have personalities? Yes. Do they have, you see already the confidence of Cornwallis at Germantown, and then all of a sudden he's a shell of himself, just sort of flabbergasted by the sheer size of this country and his inability to get it right. His engineers suggest that he's ordered to find a deep water port. He chooses Yorktown, and at that moment, the war is over. Because everybody knows, Washington has already told a militia guy, don't station anybody in Yorktown, because it can easily be cut off. And so, as we've heard this information 20 minutes before, and then all of a sudden he's going to Yorktown, right. You kind of go, oops, that's not a good decision.
No. Well, just kind of on the point you were making a moment ago, this film comes at a very important time for America, our 250th anniversary. And many hope that next year and through the celebration, it'll be a time for Americans to fall in love with their country again. And what can, through this film and other things, what can we do to advance that?
Fred, that's the best thing, to fall in love with your country again. And that speaks to the Chris's optimism, you know. And I think, you know, when we started off, when I said to Sarah, we're doing the revolution next, Barack Obama had 13 months left in his term, second term. A lot of water under the bridge. We never thought of 250. Nobody was talking about 250. A few years in, we realized, oh my goodness, if we play our cards right, we may be able, maybe not to reach the 250th of Lexington and Concord, which happened this past April 19th, but maybe it be in the fall so that we could probably suggest a more complicated and nuanced conversation that we could have so that we don't just sort of drown in our arguments about it or in fife and drum treacle, you know?
Yes,
that
right.
could easily be the case next July 4th. And then all of a sudden people started talking 250 and now it's sort of upon us. And we didn't plan it this way, but we're really, really happy that we might play a part in having a conversation that restores to us the sense of the possibilities of us cohering. As Kana Satega says, never fall out one with the other. And that's as good a thing as Johann Evil, that this, who would have thought 100 years ago that this rabble, that out of this rabble could find a people who could defy kings.
Yes.
This is a big news. This is stop the presses. That's why we stopped the presses and turned that newspaper there. You know, this is, the world would never be the same again because the United States of America not only was created, but it had survived and it had defeated the most far-flung empire on earth with go back to April 19th, 1775, the odds are 0 that this is going to be successful. And our film is how that 0 went to 100%. We hope you'll stay tuned.
Yes. One thing you mentioned earlier about how young people were, the 14-year-old, the 15-year-old, but even beyond that, most of our founding fathers were under 40 when the war began. So what lessons, and maybe this is something Chris could say, I mean, what lessons do you think the youth of that generation could give today to us about leadership, about risk, and about purpose in your life?
That's also something I've been thinking a lot about over the last really couple of years, actually, because I spend most of my workday teaching 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 20, 21, that age.
Yeah.
And so many of the key figures were at formative stages of their lives. One of the reasons why they had that kind of optimism is because they were thinking about the world that they wanted to live in and make for the 2 or 3 decades of the life that they had in front of them. So I do think that the political energy and the political idealism of youth is an important part of the story. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's something that we can lose because we have the portraits of these guys in their dotage. Right? We know them at the end of their lives, and we think that they were fathers when they were still boys.
Right.
On the precipice of, if we're talking about the political leadership, on the precipice of manhood. So, I mean, I do, it's always, from one point, it can be easy to be troubled by youth, by their energy, and they don't really know what they're talking about. And that's often true. But what's also true is that a lot of the political change and idealism, right? The people who do the fighting, who go to war with all of that energy and belief in each other, those are people who are in their late teens, early 20s. I have to say, I sometimes look at my undergraduates, I'm like, I'm not sure what kind of leaders you would have been, but I really do think that recognizing the youthful energy of this uprising is just, and it is an uprising. It's an uprising, it's an insurgency. It's something that's very easy to overlook.
And Chris, could just come back to one point you made about the great man theory and how that's discounted, but you saw something different with George Washington. Could you just say a little bit what made you be so convinced that the unique role he had?
Well, part of it is just having spent so many years reading and thinking and teaching about the 18th century. You know, I think it's obviously kind of a cliche, but the idea that Washington decides that he's going to step down rather than be president to the end of his life or continue to run. That's, again, something that's very easy to take for granted, really atypical for someone who's that revered, who has that much power. And if you know anything about the modern era, often commanders-in-chief who are really successful in leading uprisings, they decide they want to stay around a little, because they're special. And Washington was special, but he decides not to stay around. I think the other thing to me, which is remarkable about him, is that, we had that little bit at the Chew House. I mean, they just get punched in the mouth. They've had a terrible, terrible beating. And he's writing a comment. This is rather unfortunate. I mean, he's spinning what's actually a defeat into what we say that no biggie, right? We can still win this thing. And so I do think that part of it also is his belief and his capacity to inspire belief in others. It's a very, very rare quality.
There are fashions in the academic community and elsewhere of historiography, as we call it, a big $2 word, in which it is unfashionable to attribute to the great men because it comes at the neglect of the bottom-up story. And then in the binary ways of things, we throw out the top-down and focus on the bottom up, which is by itself unsatisfactory. And so what we've always tried, and throughout the last 50 years of now filmmaking, is find some way to merge those, to find some middle where they go. And so that you can learn about John Greenwood, the 14-year-old, Joseph Plum Martin, the 15-year-old, Betsy Ambler from Yorktown, who's 10 when the war began and 16 when it ends, 18 at the Treaty of Paris, and whose younger sister Lucy is born during the war. Her father calls her my only independent gal because she was born after the Declaration of Independence. And she doesn't remember the war. And so as an older woman, Betsy, writes a memoir about it, and it is so beautiful, so unbelievably beautiful to hear in the voice of a young girl what it was like to go through the revolution and to see it through her eyes, just as we see it through Washington. I mean, he gets exasperated at one point. He never shows exasperation, but he's sort of, Congress is questioning him, the officers are deserting, and he goes, look, I didn't ask for this. Anytime you want me to go, I'm happy to go, and I will be as happy as any pilgrim on his arrival to the Holy Land to go home to where it is. And Chris is absolutely right. He surrenders his military thing at the height of his power. He could have said, I'm it. I'm the king. I'm the guy. And he didn't do it. And then he does it again after his presidency. And George III himself said, then he is the greatest character of the age, because no one had that example. He felt that the highest office was citizen.
Yes.
And he wanted to go back to that and serve. And there is an enormous amount of inspiration in that gesture of giving up. I mean, we all know what that is, to give up and feel better, you know? The Beatles said it, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And this is one of the great gestures, twice.
Sarah, were you going to say something?
No, what he said.
Oh, okay. Sounds good to me, too. maybe just a little bit about today versus then. One of the concerns that our founding fathers had was about divisions in our country, and they used the term factions, and the damage that that could have to the success of our democracy. Are there lessons from their warnings that we should be paying more attention to today?
Yeah, I think so. I hope that Chris and Sarah will comment too. But I think they're constantly, particularly at the Constitutional Convention, but before, and certainly through the struggles and the frustrations and the ineptitude of trying to live under the Articles of Confederation, they're trying to reverse engineer the worst possible situations. You know, how do we keep us from going back? Washington says, all experience has shown that mankind, Jefferson says, all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. That's a few lines beyond the famous second sentence in the Declaration. And what he means, it's very simple, is that we've been subjects for all of human history, and now we're not, and they're great responsibilities. And we have to figure out how we keep people from just devolving back into the avarice and the ambition, as John Adams would said, down into the tendency to take over, to hold on to that military office, to hold on to that political office, and to figure out how the pursuit of happiness is lifelong learning. How do we acquire virtue? And it's all on their minds, and they're all thinking about it, and they're all writing it about it. So yes, there's lots of battles, but as Sarah's saying, in this respiration that takes place in the narrative that we've spent a decade trying to construct, and how some scenes come and ebb and flow, is that drumbeat of how you sustain this incredible thing that has never happened before. People like to say history repeats itself. It never has, right? No event has happened twice. Mark Twain is supposed to have said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. If he said that, he's absolutely right. And the rhymes of history, from failed invasions of Canada to pandemics to eclipses, are all rhyming with us right now. And that's all good, but at the heart of it is, we like to quote Ecclesiastes. We went to see the scrolls today, and Ecclesiastes says, what has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun, which is suggesting that human nature doesn't change, and the same quantities of generosity and greed, of virtue and venality are always present, and they're always present. The one thing, Fred, that is so great about this story is that for a second, there's something new in the world. And our obligation is to try to figure out a way to stoke or to kindle that fire that was born in this uprising.
I can't think of a better note than to end than that one, Ken. So Ken, Sarah, and Chris, thank you for this wonderful production, and thank you for spending the evening with us here at the Reagan Library.
Ladies